Mr. Mondi, thank you very much for your time and waking up to talk to us this morning. Firstly, explain to us in lay terms, what is a government bond and, importantly, the purpose of this financial instrument?
So the South African government funds its budget through tax collections. In many cases, particularly when there's low levels of economic growth, as has been the case in South Africa for the past few years, government collects less than it needs in spending. Therefore, government incurs a deficit or an overdraft. So to fund that overdraft or a deficit, as you call it, it needs to borrow somewhere. So that, in fact, process of borrowing, it's got various options as how it borrows.
Okay.
One of the options is issuing bonds. So bonds are used by government to fund itself, particularly when it faces a deficit in its spending.
Why, therefore, is it not advisable for the South African Reserve Bank to buy these government bonds directly from the Treasury?
It is advisable. I don't know why it's not advisable, because both Section 13 and Section 10 of the South African Reserve Bank Act does allow the SARB to buy government bonds. Remember, in South Africa, there's been a debate before the pandemic that came from the ANC 54th National Conference, where there was a view of taking control and nationalizing the bank. And in that process, given our experience of corruption and state capture, there were fears that these were part of going into the bank and printing money. So the current pandemic, given that the state has stretched all its resources, therefore, and our understanding that the pandemic, according to the National Treasury, may lead us to lose about 40% of employment, or to 50% in most cases, meaning that the demand for our goods and services is going to drop tremendously. And the state has got no means of supporting that high levels of unemployment. Therefore, there is an opportunity for the Reserve Bank, because if people are unemployed, there's no demand. Inflation will come down. Therefore, if we have a helicopter drop by the SARB, we can be able to fund ourselves at 0% rate, and therefore have a basic income grant for the unemployed to ensure that at least they've got access to some cash to buy food, to alleviate any poverty or destitution that we foresee post the 6 months where government has offered a package.
Finally, therefore, and very briefly for me, Mr. Mondi, the Deputy Minister, David Masondo, has stressed the importance of the independence of the SARB, first and foremost, flowing from those reports at the weekend that he supported the suggestion that government bonds be bought directly from the Treasury. Why is it dangerous for the minister, whether it be the main minister or his deputy, to meddle in the work of the SARB?
There is no danger, really. Remember, the Treasury sets the policy and the central bank implements. The policy set for the SARB is 3 to 6% inflation targeting. This is a pandemic. So therefore, the fear, I think, for those who are against the deputy minister's articulation is that this intervention will become permanent, which in fact is again a scare tactic reminiscent of the apartheid regime around the ANC being communist and therefore going to nationalize everything.
And I'm sorry to cut in there, because also there is the suggestion that the countries where this has been done, to buy bonds directly from the Treasury by the SARB or by the central banks, there was a mention of Zimbabwe, and there's also the mention of Venezuela, in terms of hyperinflation, that is.
That happens in a situation whereby government has mismanaged the economy to zero. In our case, we have a pandemic. We've got a very serious problem of poverty, unemployment, inequality, high level of destitution, and therefore in the absence of government having a very strong balance sheet, as is the case, we believe that the helicopter drop that will be put into a special purpose vehicle that will then ensure that we don't have 50% of South Africa's working population, unemployment, starving, that there is access to some income at a very 0% because helicopter drop. That I think, with the information that we have today, that the support of 6 months not enough. The pandemic will be with us at least for the next 18 months. And therefore, this country will have social upheaval if we've got 50% unemployment. Let's do something now. Let's not wait. Let's do it now, as the minister is suggesting. And if we do that, I think as a once-off, not as a permanent, as a once-off intervention into an SPV, will go a long way to alleviate social upheaval, poverty, and destitution, which we expect to be the case after the post-COVID-19 crisis.
Right, Lumgile Mondi, thank you very much for your time and insights. He is an independent economist with the University of Witwatersrand.